Today, let's go over 4 ways to finish your seams without using a serger or overlocker. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are going to get into ways you can finish your seams without using a serger or overlocker. So it's going to go over 4 different ways, 4 different items that you can either get or that you can follow for a pattern that you can finish off your seams to have nice, clean looking seams without having to go through the process of buying an expensive serger or overlocker, depending on what you call them. So this is going to be looking into 4 different items. The first we're going to talk about are pinking shears or zigzag scissors. So as you can see here, I have a bunch of different cotton materials and which have those raw edges, and sometimes you want to make it look really nice, or you're making like a garment that you want to make sure that will last over and over again. And one way that you can actually finish off these edges is using these scissors. So these scissors are very different than your normal scissors. As you can see, they have this like zigzag pattern in them. So if I get my regular scissors here and I cut a little bit of this fabric, what you're going to see is we get that nice straight line effect that would come from when you cut anything with scissors. Now the issue is over time, especially with certain fabrics such as woven fabrics like this cotton, it will fray. So if you put this into the washing machine, you're going to get little frayed edges which can eventually damage your seams. With pinking shears though, as I cut this, what you see is that you get this pattern effect onto your fabric, and this can help reduce fraying. I'm not saying that it's going to be perfect and it will stop it from fraying, but it can help reduce it so that over time your garment holds up a little better. So I find this to be a great example if you are making like a costume or maybe doll clothes where you're not really going to be washing it, but it may go through some use. These pinking shears can really help. Now in total, pinking shears can really range the price gamut of being like $5 to much more expensive. So it really depends on what you're looking for, how often you're going to use them, but they can be a really great choice in finishing your seams as it's very quick. There's like no sewing required. You just have to go through and cut your seams, and then you get that really nice effect. So the second option we're going to be talking about today is bias tape. So I've done actually a pattern exactly with this bias tape, and I will be sure to link that in case you're interested. There's single fold bias tape, which that's what this is, and then there's double fold bias tape. And the way that this works is that you match up where that little fold is with your fabric, and then you fold this over your fabric. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do it, and normally your pattern, especially if you're using one, will specify exactly how they want it done. But what it does is it just helps cover up that raw edge. So this is really popular for quilts, for example. As you'll see, they have that binding along the edge. Now the best part about bias tape is you can actually make your own, so you do not need to buy it. Buying it does help it be a little more standardized, but there are different like machines and equipment that you can get where it will allow you to make your own bias tape using whatever fabric you have on hand. You could use cotton fabric to match whatever pattern or item you're going with. So it is very, very versatile, and it will help keep your seams clean. It just does take a little bit longer because you are doing that extra step of having to either buy it or make it, and then you have to put it onto your fabric. So the third option we're going to talk about today is the overcast foot. So you can get these, so I got this off Amazon. You can get just this foot itself, or you can get the whole kit. So as you can see, this foot looks very, very similar to your regular sewing machine foot, except it has this little bar in the middle, and sometimes this bar will actually extend up to where the needle is as well. And what it does is it helps guide your fabric, so like the edge of the fabric would be along where that bar is, so it acts like a guide for you. And then if your bar does go up to like where the needle is, it just acts as another way to make sure that the thread is going over both edges of your fabric. And this helps you to then get like some sort of overcast or zigzag stitch so that you can finish off your seams just using your sewing machine. So it looks very, very similar to the effect that you would get from a serger, except this is only using 2 threads, so it's not as complicated looking. So here's my sewing machine. Here is the foot set up, so you can see very similar to my regular sewing machine foot. Now on the side, when you go to your stitches, if your machine actually has like the overcast stitch, you could definitely use that. Otherwise, just use one of your zigzag stitches and it will go back and forth. So I have a little raw fabric here, just some extra fabric. It does have that raw edge. I have it lined up against the bar, as you can see, for the presser foot. My needle then is on the side of the fabric, and then I just let my sewing machine go. And as you can see, the needle is going back and forth, and this allows it to both get the edge of the fabric as well as go into the fabric to help finish off that stitch. So it works really, really nicely to finish off the edge of my fabric and gives it a really clean effect without using a serger. So the fourth option we're going to talk about today is a French seam. A French seam works really nicely to completely hide your edges so you will not see it. The way that you do a French seam is you take your two pieces of fabric that you're trying to sew together and you match them with wrong sides together, and you just take a straight seam all the way down, about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You just take that straight seam, and then what you're going to do is cut very, very closely to that seam to remove that extra fabric. So as you can see now, if I opened up the seam, you're still seeing the raw edges, so it is not complete. So I'm just going to take my scissors and cut very, very closely to that seam to remove that seam allowance. And then I'm going to fold over my fabric so that the right sides are now matching. And then you can either kind of do this one of two ways. You could either use your finger to press the seam to like one side or the other, or you could definitely use your iron, especially if you're doing this for a much larger piece of sewing or clothing, whatever your project you're doing. And then what we're going to do is just lay this out so that I can then take another seam that will be about probably like a 1/2 inch from that edge. You could definitely adjust these seam allowances to meet your need, but I'm just going to take a straight stitch all the way down, very close to where that other seam was, and this is going to hide those raw edges. So this is a really nice way to completely hide your seams. As you can tell, there are more steps involved, so it does take a little more time. So at the end, this is what it looks like. You can see my seam is here. Then when I open it, there's no raw edges, so you cannot see any of that fabric on the outside. On the inside, there's no raw edges either. Everything comes out looking really nice and clean. And so this is a great way to hide your raw edges, just it takes a little longer. You would also have to account for you need more fabric because obviously this has a larger seam allowance. So when you're cutting it out, if your pattern doesn't necessarily call for French seams, be sure you cut it out with a little bit more fabric so that you could take into account what would be needed for the seam allowance. So let me know in the comments, what is your favorite way to finish off your seams? It could just be a serger, it could be one of these methods, could be something entirely different. If you like this video and you want to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me what you want to see next. Thanks for watching.